This is our 7 o'clock show called Taradition and KAPOW, engaging youth in storytelling and comics. I guess we'll start with introductions, and then we can kind of talk a little bit about what we're doing, and we can talk about some various things of the work that we've been doing with youth, and specifically Native youth, American Indian youth, around the country, and our organization that's getting off the ground, the work we continue to do. So, Guatsi, Sahalpa, Dawashra. My name is Lee Francis. It's my hello to all of you this evening. My family is from the Pueblo of Laguna, which is about 45 miles west of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I am currently the National Director of Wordcraft Circle of Native Writers and Storytellers, which is our parent organization for the Indigenous Narratives Collective. It's a 22-year-old organization that works with professionals and emerging American Indian, Native, and Indigenous writers to help with their writing and to continue to make sure that their voices are strong and that they're heard throughout the world. I've been the National Director for almost 10 years at this point, with a small sabbatical in the middle, but very active within about the last 5 years or so. My background is I was born in Virginia. I grew up bi-coastal, but my grandma's family had a house out there in Laguna, and so I spent most of my time out there in the summer times, being with my family and sort of being a part of that. So sort of I had my summer grow-ups with my Native family out there. And I've done a lot of youth work. I taught at Laguna for several years. I worked youth programs, youth development programs, college prep programs, and a number of other things. At the same time, being a poet and a writer, and so that's kind of where I come into all of this, is sort of being the writer and the organizer for the work that we're doing. So,
all right. I'm Arigon Starr. I will say Hinksjay, that's hello, and how you doing in the Creek language, and Tani Apachia Yani, which is hello, how you doing, in KAPOW. I'm an enrolled KAPOW member. I grew up all over the country because my wonderful dad, Ken Wapakami, was a Navy man, so I've been all over the place. And I currently reside in Los Angeles. And I come to Inc. With my project Super Indian. Super Indian started as a radio program back in 2007 on the Native Voice One network. What we did is we recorded 10 5-minute episodes and packaged it to an hour program. And it's the story of a boy who ate tainted commodity cheese and got superpowers. And I've been doing the book online as a webcomic series since 2011, and now it's in its first volume. Volume 1 is out, and it's there. And on June the 5th, I'm super excited about this. Comixology, the big kahuna of all of our big-time comics, has picked up Super Indian, so we're going to be part of their universe as well. So if you have a reader, Kindle reader, Kobo, whatever you have, iBook, it's already there, it's online, so we're out there. And that's my story, and I will stick to it.
Hi, my name is Marty Tubolts. I'm Oglala Lakota from originally from South Dakota. I live and work in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm a nationally published editorial cartoonist. Been in the business for about 29, 30 years of graphic design as well as comics and editorials. Most of my background is in news and news gathering, but I kind of gravitated toward editorial cartoons all my life. And I've been asked to join the group here and do a little illustration, try to tell some stories.
Excellent. So that's us. So great to see you all. Have a good evening. No. Yeah. Like we just got here. This is our organization. We kind of start here, which is the Indigenous Narratives Collective. This began 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now at this point at the Phoenix Comic-Con, Ms. Arigon Starr was a sort of founding partner of this work that we do, and really it was a number of Native comics, comic book artists, graphic novelists, and writers had got together at this particular panel at the Phoenix Comic-Con and said, well, why don't we kind of get together and do some work and see what that's like. Kind of pooling the resources and really being able to be strengthened as a group. And then I had known Arigon for a while as connected to WordCraft Circle, which is the second logo on the side. And we had been connected, and then we met up at a gathering that we were at for Cherokee young people in Cherokee community, and we started talking about comics. And she was like, I got this thing called Super Indian, and I'm like, I've read your stuff online, and it's awesome. And you're awesome. She's like, you're awesome too. And so it was really a fun time to be awesome together. And so we started talking. We came up with this sort of fanciful idea. And if you come by the booth, we've got some of our comics here. You see over here on this logo, this is really sort of the impetus. Like INC had developed, but really formulating as this sort of group. We had started joking around of like, why don't we have? We were reminiscing, so we were going like old school. Like, remember the old Comics Authority? Remember the old comics code that they used to put on everything? I was like, why don't we have like an Indigenous comics code where like all the books that Native people come out with, we can just stamp that on there and it's approved like as Indigenous people. And so we put it together, and that was really sort of the start of this group beginning to develop this particular comic book and gelling together. Along the way, we pulled in some great people. We got Marty on the phone. We got Michael Chiasse. We got Beth LaPense. There's a number of others that have been a part of this. Roy Boney out of Cherokee. Michael would be here with us. He's actually in underground right now outside of the Oklahoma City airport as the tornadoes are going through, so he sends his apologies. They've actually evacuated the Will Rogers Airport at this point. So, but he made this great book called Native Americans in Comic Books. And it's really sort of the basis for all the work that we do, which is this idea of, wanting to take a lot of these sort of stereotypical images of Native people and wanting to begin to tell our own stories. And wanting to put an authentic sort of space in that, and especially in working with young people. And so we're going to talk from our perspective about this in terms of working with young people and working through this medium, which is this amazing synthesis of story and art. And it's two things. I've worked with young people across the board, native and non-native, for many years. And what I find is that this tends to be that sort of wonderful mesh, because everybody doodles. You've got these great, sort of tagging kids, and they've got all these designs, or everybody, all the kids, the anime kids, and they're all drawing anime stuff. And then there's all these wonderful stories that they have. And so wanting to get into being able to tell their own stories from their own perspective, their own cultural or community or neighborhood background is really what sort of anchors the work that we do. And so we sort of thought about it, and we said, well, why don't we put together our first book? It's a little, 8-pager?
Yep,
a little 8-pager over here, and we called up the folks that we know within the community who are writing and doing their own work, and we put them all into this book. And really, this is sort of our distributive thing for young people to say, look, you can write your own story.
Yes.
We have one right there.
It's really cool inside too.
It's some amazing artwork, some amazing stories, really people talking about where they come from and who they are and representing as Indigenous people, which sort of gives us an access point for all of our young people to be able to do this kind of work, because it's not strictly an Indigenous thing, although that's our perspective.
Right.
But it's really a space. I've talked to a number of other folks, multicultural, of just, whatever sort of ethnic background, that are saying, that's really cool. We could probably get our kids into this space too. And, the wonderful invite by Comic Book Classroom that's put all this on, it just really aligns up perfectly of how we can use comics to, they say literacy and we say storytelling. So it's really one and the same. For us, literacy is storytelling. It's how we tell our stories. To keep our community spirit and our people, to continue to bring them with us and to do this honoring. So, so we'll kind of go through this. We'll show you some stuff, and then we'll sort of pass it down the line. So, because I put together a PowerPoint, I got to show the slide. So,
yes, gotta have.
in this
day and age, there are so many distractions for young people.
In this day and age of multimedia and distractions for young people, how do you keep their attention? Especially when we want to engage them, in some of these wonderful values and wonderful stories. Because most of the stuff that we know exists in 140 characters, or a Facebook post, or we're sort of wedded to these, these devices. And so one of the sort of ideas behind all of this is to be able to begin to expand upon those stories. So how do we find that fundamental of storytelling? How do we bring in our traditional values, as many of our young people continue to practice this, across the board? And how do we sort of wed those two? And how do we bring that community spirit out for all of our people that are here within North America and in this globe? And specifically within Native folks, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So based on this great book, you can see some of the wonderful images that Native people have had to contend with. Some of our favorite comic books. I was going through, and as we were sort of preparing this and finding images, I found the Super Chief Superman issue from the 1950s, where Chief Superman has the war bonnet, and he's fighting the native braves who are firing arrows at him, silly natives for firing arrows. And then there's also a Super Chief Batman also. So we see a lot of this kind of stuff, and so the work really is that these stories are not authentic, and our work is trying to find that authenticity in working with young people. And that's really the crux of this, native or non-native. It's really how we find that authentic story, that authentic self, to be able to use comic books and graphic novels as that medium in which we are able to tell those deep, true, and meaningful stories, and being able to work with our young people to find those stories. Because if you have worked with young people, you gotta work that, because we don't have a disposition towards that right now to be able to engage in those stories. It is quick. How you doing? Good. I'll tell you a little bit. I'll do my vague book stuff. Today was really horrible. I wish it wasn't like that next time. And you're like, what happened? And then nobody answers, right? So how do we begin to try and find those true connections to draw that storytelling out? So here's some of the great things we've had over the years. Usually shamans or mystics or some sort of, as I've termed it, an amalgam Indian, which is this idea they're sort of this vacuous Native American. It's not specific. It doesn't have a tribe. It's just sort of native. Through the years, that's been in flux. As there's been more cultural consciousness that's come in, you see some more development within that space. People that have they're Shoshone or they're Cherokee or they're etc. But beginning to work with sort of counteracting this space, especially for young people who see these images. And so this becomes the truth of what they believe that identity is. And so the work that we do is trying to get young people to say that this is not necessarily the identity that you need to gravitate towards, but this is what you can begin to develop on. So this is done by the lovely Arigon Starr. This is our amalgam Indian.
Yeah, that Chief Candy Corn.
We call him Chief Candy Corn. So notice the fringe.
Yeah, you need to have some humor in it.
The single feather. He's an action hero.
Really look at it, how serious it is.
Yeah.
You can't laugh at all.
Got our action star in medicine pouch, breechcloth. And as I used to teach, I taught Native Americans in children's literature at one point, and my favorite is that they're always cut. All right. So, and we know every superhero is cut, of course, but Native people, there's never a fat Native person ever. In they're always just ripped, and I'm like, have you visited Pueblo? Because Pueblo people are not cut. We're built like barrels. So, and then of course our most recent iconography that we're developing for a new generation. So we have this wonderful, and as a lot of people are like, well, what do you think about that? And I'm like, I'm reserving judgment at this point.
Same here.
Because I'm curious to see how it's portrayed. Obviously, we haven't seen the full cut of the movie. There's been a lot of great interviews with Mr. Depp. He was really great when they were filming with a lot of Native kids. He was out there and taking a lot of pictures. A lot of my students, actually, some of my former students, got to hang out with him. They're posting on Facebook being like, look at me. I'm like, you stink. Because I didn't get to hang out with Mr. Depp.
Yeah, exactly.
Just saying. Which brings us to where we are. And so in terms of this work that we do with young people, so this idea of the storytelling and the tradition that we begin to bring is really this beginning with this sense of self and this connection with the self. And so we'll kind of I just gave you sort of I don't know, 7-minute, 8-minute introduction, but so I'll kind of let it to my panel to be able to talk a little bit about, this idea of storytelling and how we engage youth into that deep storytelling space, especially with not only like native comics, but as we've got all this wonderful source material, all of these great stories that are told, and we know sort of, all of these sort of independent comics, but even the comics that we read in mainstream, the ones we gravitate towards are the ones that tell good stories. And those are the ones that we hook on, and coupled with like a really good visual dynamic. And so this coupling between the two of how we tell an abstract with images and the story itself is being what drives this kind of work, engaging young people in tradition and KAPOW. So I'll sort of pass it, that's the framing, and I'll let you all talk for a little bit, since I'm taking my time.
What do you think, Marty?
Well, when you look at the language, all tribes have different languages, all based on regional type pronunciations. And one thing we have in common with the comic books is that it's one language that transcends all other languages. And I've always thought this medium was really powerful. You'd have a photo, you have a picture, and you could just have the picture alone. Or you can have a little word balloon. You can break the word balloon up to have a passage of time. You can set your pace. You can do multiple panels. So the story jumps from one to another to follow the storylines. It always seemed really powerful to me that my drawings would just transcend anything I wanted to say, and people read in what they wanted to say or what they thought of said. And so oftentimes it just kind of got away from me. I did this editorial cartoon where these protesters are protesting alcohol sales in White Clay, which is a border town of Pine Ridge where they sell $12 million a year in taxes on beer and alcohol to the Pine Ridge Reservation, which is a dry reservation. Okay, they're protesting at Stop White Clay, this and that. And I drew these little children with signs saying, just quit drinking. And so just to get to the point. Well, what struck me as interesting is that people were writing me, emailing me and telling me that, oh, the kids are so powerful, oh, they have this message. And I was thinking, what kids? I wrote that. And so to me, that really demonstrated that this is a powerful medium. I created a character that people had empathy with, and it transcended what I was trying to say, and they actually brought this drawing to life, to actual characters. And there are other instances where that type of thing happened, and a lot of times I try to push the envelope a little bit to make people angry, so that they will remark, or they will carry the discussion on. And that's part of the educational process as well. When we're talking about Deb, for instance, he's kind of the anchor. Whenever you have a story, of course, you have a protagonist, and he goes through a problem, he or she goes through a problem, and then the problem is solved, happy ending. Well, in order to get into that frame, that character, you have to have some kind of anchor. And so like Johnny Depp, he's a handsome guy, everybody thinks. They always want him to come out on top. They like to see him on the screen. And so he's going to be the driving force of this movie, the storyline. Or with Dances with Wolves, you had Kevin Costner, a non-Indian, that was Indian, it was accepted in an Indian tribe, and that's kind of a fantasy, that people can buy into. But if you just have a plain Indian character, it's harder to get that connection. I guess you can use other tools, like you can kill off the parents, which they say is one of the best things you can do to a character to get empathy. Whether it's Superman or whatever, Batman. And so that's one of the problems that are faced with this type of storytelling. When you look at demographics, most people that read comic books are young men, and so they want to see people cut, women, voluptuous women, pretty women, and so that kind of puts all the characters that are in comic books into sort of their own stereotype. And that transcends to us Indians. When we try to do, when they want to portray us, they have to put the woman in a buckskin bikini, man, buckskin.
Loincloth only.
So I guess one of the things that I would like to do which are the stories I'm working on, is try to make a character that people can have empathy with, and then just follow the story, how it unfolds.
Yeah, and as far as like what's happening with Super Indian, because it started as an audio theater kind of thing first, that really hooked people in, to just kind of understand, that there was a lot of humor going on within the story, and then taking those concepts. I had so many leftover scripts after doing this project, because basically they limited the airtime to 5 minutes per episode, which really didn't give a lot of time to flesh out the character. So my bounty from doing the project, being sad that they were only 5 minutes, I've got lots of backstory, tons of backstory. So I'm just really getting into that, and talking to kids and reading this, they're like, wow, we're finally in this. And one thing I've really emphasized with the drawing is to really make them look like Native people, and really just kind of like what you're saying, now they're not all cut, and there's all different shapes and sizes and shades and ages and that sort of thing. It's really nice for these kids and also for the elders and all of our community to say, wow, that looks like me, or that looks like my auntie, or that sort of thing. That has been really key into just getting this whole project across, and just really just having people go, I like this, it's funny, these are like my people. And hopefully when people, look at these things, they just feel like they're part of the bigger Super Indian universe. And I hope to tell more stories and keep the kids entertained, because, again, it's important for me to have a youth base for Super Indian rather than kind of going off into darker, dark night kind of stuff, because I'll let Marty or Lee tell those stories. Mine's just going to be kind of fun and not quite Sunday comics, but almost. But just something where it's just kind of lighthearted and fun, and that all ages can read it, because that's so important.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah, because there's going to be plenty of the other. So
yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's really key in terms of this work with young people across the board, is that in this space there is the struggle for identity. So how many educators we got out in the house right now? We got a few. All right, that's okay. You don't have to be. I'm just.
I mean, somebody could come.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Thanks to Rep.
Yeah.
Just saying. Is this struggle with identity, and that's, as we watch young people, they're struggling in this. Not like some more or less on that scale, but this trying to figure out who they are and where they exist in this space. I sat in on one of the panels this morning, which was how comic books have impacted you. And I'm listening to these stories of people that said, they read a comic book, and it literally, the way that the characters were portrayed, it changed their lives. There's one young man who's talking about how he's having a struggle, in his upbringing, and he was kind of feeling kind of violent. And he was always kind of a big guy. And reading comic books, he saw that the big guys were the ones that protected people. And so this sort of change in seeing what the resonance of this comic book. So as we work with young people, it's about we're consciously and consistently aware of the struggle of identity. And as Native people, we have a very strong struggle with identity. For me, I don't look like any of these fellas. But I know where my grandma was from. I know, what her house looked like. I know what the things that I inherited that are important in the traditions and the prayers and the ceremonies and the things that came to me, that I hope to pass on to my son. But sort of like this how I struggle through this, how I see myself in this space, and how I sort of begin to represent myself. And so a lot of the work that we do with young people is addressing that core issue, is how do you represent yourself in this true, authentic space that really means that your story is valued, that your story is important. And that's what we often struggle with. I'm a lifelong educator, so I've been in the classroom for a decade plus now. And that's what, we don't have the time for authentic stories. And we try to make it. We try. We're the fighting against the tide oftentimes of trying to make that space to be able to tell an authentic story, to be able to understand where our students are coming from, where our young people, the background that they have. But it's always this tension of how we can make that space in this very fast-paced world of assessments and benchmarks, and a space where even nowadays, I mean, it's amazing being at any con, but like just here, because this is bigger than I think anything I've experienced. I know you've experienced, but it's just like, man, we're all comic book people here, And I had a buddy of mine that just joined me, and he was just like, I don't even know what you're talking about. It's just like it's not entirely in the mainstream. It is in the mainstream, but there's like other things that go on in this world, and in some ways, comic books still don't have that sort of validity and that value. Several of the panels have talked about like the hard work that people have done to get comics into the classroom, to be used as a teaching tool, a comic book pedagogy. And so, our work is working with young people to be able to tell these stories, to find this kind of space, and what comes out of that space, for sustainability. So, I mean, John's work. Mm-hmm. So,
yep.
Here he is. You've got this, he's basically drawing a young man. It's this great book. We sold our last one, sorry, but you can find it online. It's called The Wool of Jonesy. And it's basically about this, this sort of young man, he's a Navajo sheep. And if you go through the book, you can see, him kind of walking across the res, going to go sell his wool at the market. There's no dialogue. It's all panel and art, but it tells this marvelous story, a very simple story that is so true and authentic to what it's like being out there. I'm always amazed by I love going back to it because it looks like where I grew up, out there, in the middle of New Mexico. I'm sure there's reminiscences to South Dakota too, this sort of flat, cattle-guarded land out there that we see. You see on, a lot of the stuff that's produced is for young people, especially in Native communities, because oftentimes we do a lot of stuff. So you can see the Chickasaw Adventures is a book that came out. There's, a young man at the center of it, he goes back in history and is going through these battles that the Cherokee people fought as sort of this time-traveling young man. So it's these wonderful adventures. And as young people begin to sort of develop their own style. So this is one of the coolest guys that we've been in contact. Jeffrey Vereggi. Yeah. Some of his stuff just kind of slightly gone viral. I've seen it make the rounds. So he's northwest coast. You know what specifically?
It's one of those tribes I cannot pronounce. I have to ask him. How do you say that? Or something?
Yeah, like Stalin.
Yeah.
I think it's. But the sort of iconography that he took from the northwest coast peoples.
Yeah, that he sat with a carver to learn the technique. And say, how do you put that together?
Yeah. And so Tlingit, Sklallam, any of those folks that kind of move up on that corridor have very similar art styles. And so, my favorite, as I pointed out, is the things that you see is, this is the new storytelling. And this is that authentic storytelling, right? I love that. My favorite is Superman in there because he's got wings.
And the wings
those are feathers,
Southwest.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Northwest. Yeah.
So he's got these feathers, that's the capes, that's how he flies. And so this authenticity that comes from the stories that we tell, that connect us to our traditions. So for us, our people, in the Southwest, we have our storytellers. And I was talking to my buddy and, the people that I've seen, I'm like, the reason we remember all this kind of stuff is we have our artist row and all the rest of that, but we come back because they either have the ability to tell a story with their art, they have ability to tell a story with their story. And that's why we read the books. And we know our favorite, we can name them, we can rattle them off. And I've just kind of been getting back into the whole world. And so it's like, Jonathan Nelson is who I found. And I'm just like, wow, he's writing these indie comics that are just really interesting stories. And I'm like, wow, what a great kind of storytelling. And of course, we know all the legends and everything. But it's like how we tell these particular stories. And I wanted to ask Marty just a quick question about the fact that, your work, in terms of being able to tell that story in one panel, or in like two panels, because you're mostly for news distribution. How does that work in terms of that engagement, especially around the traditional type of stuff? I mean, obviously you're looking at the indigenous political things, but how do you draw that out to be able to tell that story in one frame?
Well, it's real difficult, but I also have some help too because they're based on what's going on today. So people already have a background of the political issue that's making fun of or bringing to light. I like to make things real ironic as possible.
I've seen some of your work. A friend of mine will send me one every once in a while.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how those things kind of play out, because, you know, I've been doing it now pretty much as kind of a hobby. It started out when I was a young man, when I was in high school. I did it for the high school newspaper, and I kept doing them for Native American newspapers through the years. And I've been real regular with Indian Country Day, doing for the last 10 years, doing 52 a year. So I amassed quite a few editorial cartoons. And it's really difficult to try to do it in one panel. Sometimes you can get away with breaking it up into 4 panels if it's really complex, or maybe 2 panels. You know, but it's square. It's a square format, like you would do a CD or an album cover. So it makes the composition a bit tougher.
You know, this whole thing is kind of swimming upstream. I mean, it's just really difficult. I see that in anthropology, that in the anthropobooks and everything, they freeze Native Americans in time.
Right.
So you do a comparison, contrast of religion patterns between the Pueblo, or, you know, this and that. And then, but I work so hard to bring them, so I don't want to hear you talking about it unless you brought them forward to yesterday. That they just, it's almost like they want to freeze Native Americans in time, and that's what they think they are now. And that is very difficult to fight.
It seems like it's always ends around Wounded Knee, 1890.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
You know, then after that, they don't care that, we went through the Depression. And we went to World War I, we went to World War II, Korea.
I know.
My department, I'm at UW, and I'm in American Studies. And
They might think Wisconsin.
or Washington.
Washington.
But so I'm up at the University of Wyoming, and one of our department had a Native student who did interviews with a guy from his neighborhood who was talking about the Japanese American internees from World War II being brought down to the res to build a bridge. And the interplay of like the culture clash, and I've heard part of the interview, and the guy talks about there's still this us-them dichotomy. And the thing is, to have this story where you're telling, well, you know, we put them in a pen so they wouldn't run away or whatever, like there's got to be an us. And like the ideas of Native Americans and just all sorts of different kinds of Americans as actors in history, where we usually think of these huge whitewashed like war movies or whatever, that like there's a living history for everybody, and no one tells these stories.
And that's
Oh yeah.
Well, it actually comes down to a lot of how the information is put out there. You know, like we don't have access to big publishing houses,
Right.
and, you know, New York Times and whatnot, and so, you know, we're slowly getting that. You know, with the advent of new medias, you know, you're seeing more and more things now in comics. You're seeing my stuff, but before you'd have to subscribe to the publication to see my stuff.
Well, one of the things that
Now I'm on Facebook, and it's web, it's viral.
Oh, yeah.
I get thousands of hits, you know, which I don't,
one of the things I've always thought ironic, at least when I was working with American Indian youth in like the early 80s, was how much their history of their family or movies they went to and what they liked were Westerns.
Oh yeah.
You know, so many of them had names like Randolph for Randolph Scott, or they had names like John for John Wayne. And I remember asking him one time, well, did you play Cowboys and Indians? And they go, well, yeah, sure. And then I go, who are the Cowboys? And they'd never really, it dawns on them they have to think about their identity and, who was the cowboy in it. And I ask, well, what did those people grow up to be? And they go, reservation police.
There you go.
That's a good story. I like
But I mean,
that.
it was like, just to stop and think and reflect on, wait a minute,
Well.
you're playing cowboys and Indians, and you're killing the Indians,
Right.
But it was just a game.
Yeah.
And lots of that just a game or what you see, unfortunately, becomes the identity you carry forward.
And
It's a way of, it's almost like a propaganda. It's a way of instilling a racial stereotype in your children, whether it's Peter Pan, why is the red man red? Which I never saw Peter Pan growing up, even though that was during my time when I was growing up. And so when I was in first and second grade, we'd get in fights on the playground. The kids would say that to me. And I never understood it until years later when the VCR come out and I saw Peter Pan. And I said, oh, that darn Walt Disney.
Oh, yeah.
All this time, I never realized where that came from. But it's something as simple and as innocent as a cartoon.
It just becomes embedded in.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's deeply embedded. It's under the surface, and it's brought to the surface through racial tension. Through the years, you learn to fight back, and that's an unfortunate consequence of that kind of behavior. But you understand where this stuff comes from. Where they say, well, the mascot issue, team mascot issue, is harmless. And maybe it is. Maybe you go to a Washington Redskins game and everybody's saying, well, we're brave, we're strong. And that's the way we feel Indians are. But then you go to the other team and they're saying, kill the Indians.
Yeah.
Cowboys scalp the Indians.
Right.
Headlines in
And
newspapers.
that tomahawk chop.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
tomahawk
Advantage
chop.
to-
Oh, I can't stand watching the Braves.
Yeah.
So I have a
And so, these types of racial stereotypes, they're ingrained in our children. They're taught to our children, whether we like it or not. It's just part of the media that they're exposed to. And one of the things that we do as cartoonists or as writers is we try to tell the truth. We try to get this message out there. And when I was a young man, to be a commercial artist, you had to understand a lot of tools. It was really complicated. There's a lot of math involved, inspecting type, enlarging photos, getting it photographed, negatives, double negatives. You go in the darkroom to do something. Now you're doing Photoshop. A couple clicks, it's done. And so what that means is it makes that media accessible to our children, our young people growing up, so they can tell their stories the way they want to. And that's one of the things I think we really want to talk about too, is that how do we train these young people to say, yeah, you can make a comic book like this. Yeah, it could be colored. You don't have to pay for printing. You could do it online, and it's just a website or a blog or whatever.
There's
whatever.
no reason not to.
And
at this
so
Right.
what they need is the tools. They need to understand the tool. And that's one of the key pieces that our children are missing right now.
Is getting those tools.
Yep.
Yeah. My reservation is located in Shannon County, which is the poorest county in the United States of America. There are 17,000 Indians living on that reservation. Poverty is $6,000 a year average income. 85% unemployment. Children grow up there. Their 18-year-olds are the largest segment of that population. Their suicide rates are the highest in the country. And so we say, well, what do we do? What are we going to do? People are scared. The average lifespan of an adult male is 48 years old. I'm 3 years over that. I'm an anomaly. Most of my contemporaries, most of my cousins that I grew up with, they're gone. They're gone. And that's just a fact of life that these children have growing up. So we always ask the question, what are we going to do? We bring back our religion, we bring back our language, and try to take control of this. We try to get our youth away from alcohol and drug abuse, which is hard to do when you're living in poverty. When you got a house that was built for 3 people with 5 families in it.
Yeah.
It overloads the sewage. The house is run down before you know it. You know, and you just struggle with this every day. You know. And so what I would like to do, and what I see a lot of people doing on my reservation, is trying to come together and provide opportunities for these children. And whether it's a meal, and some of them don't even, they get their meals at school. In the summertime, they go hungry without summer school. And that's a harsh reality in some places. And this is the United States of America. This is not Africa. This is not Brazil or Argentina or somewhere.
Yeah.
It's right in your back door.
You had a
You
question.
tell
Yeah.
people that, and they can't relate to it. You know, the person in Boulder talking about equality and diversity. Okay, don't get me started on that one. People in Boulder talking about equality and diversity, that you try to bring that up, and for them to try to imagine what it's like. I mean, I grew up with no indoor plumbing, no electricity until I was 12, you know, that kind of thing. So I can relate some, but I don't ever remember having to go to bed hungry. That talking, you know, about children going to bed hungry. Yeah, you'll think third world developing nation, you'll think the South Sudan, but it really is. It's Pine Ridge. It's, you know, some of the reservations, those northern reservations.
Yeah. And
It is a disgrace.
Yeah. We have 2 questions, so let's.
Well, I just, like, so taking sort of dominant cultural narratives like the superhero story and making it relevant to Native youth so they can dream of being heroic and being being agents in their own lives, making life better. Like, did you consciously choose the superhero genre for?
I did, yeah. I thought that was the quickest route to tell that kind of a story, and to have the kids say, oh, wow, we finally have one of us up there. Wow, actually drawn by a Native person. You know, because there are others out there, but they're not done by us. They're, you know, there's Forge and Danny Moonstar and all these other ones that are out there. But we have no input, we have no say.
And it's always the way that somebody views
Yeah.
Native people, as much as they try to make it, you know, relevant and responsive and oftentimes very beautiful. It's still a separation because it's how it's being viewed, and so it's this sort of change. You know, Danny Moonstar went from, you know, the braids to now she's got the power suit. Well, there's a cultural consciousness that begins to develop with that, you know, over time. But it's still it's still separate from the ways that we tell our stories within this space. And so, you know, being able to sort of choose that, and this is how we think about this when we work with young people, and sort of our guiding principles as we go into schools, and we've been into a few schools and several schools at this point, is that that story, because tradition gets tangled up in history. So whenever we say tradition, it puts us back into the 1890s as if that's the only place we exist. But this is really the sort of circles of how we develop with young people in finding that tradition, is that it begins with the self. You got to know where you are in the space, who you are, where is your, and really not like, I am Native, right?
Right.
Who are you specifically? Who is your family? Who is your grandparents? If you know Dene people, Navajo people, their introductions are always, you know, they're very known for the introductions, right? We all do it, but they cultivate the introductions of, you know, I am born of, you know, these 2 clans, and these are my grandparents, and these are my great-grandparents. And so they actually identify themselves in that center of that circle, you know, of the self, the community, and then the world. And so this is our main teaching tool, is who are you? That's the specificity. Stories are specific. The best stories are the most specific ones, right? And then identify that into where you come from, who's around you. And then what is the world, and how is that viewpoint of the world? So you get something like Super Indian that has this sort of, you know, tongue-in-cheek kind of space, is how you are being viewed in this space. So this is sort of our grounding when we work with young people. You had one question or a statement? Pardon?
If you have more that you want to share with us, that's fine.
Oh, great. Well, no,
it's about
find
that
us online.
time.
There we are. So we got like,
Okay.
yes, and we got like
Okay.
5 minutes, so we want to make sure we got.
So I'm actually on my way, starting a new teaching job in Tulsa, in elementary
Yay.
school. I'm really excited, and I don't know, is there one or two simple things you could suggest to just starting place? I got lucky enough to come here because my sister-in-law is way into comics, but I never grew up reading them at all, and I'm just happy to be here. But anything you would suggest I do as I start with my new classroom in August?
You got elementary kids?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what age I have yet, but
So there's a great, and I don't have it on. I'm sorry I didn't show it, but it's a really great type of thing of to get them engaged in this type of work. Is you set up a page and you do 6 panels on the page, and then in each panel you ask them about themselves. What's your favorite food? Who are your grandparents? What does your home look like? Where are you going to go this summer? So things that ground them in the self. And then also things that pull into the community and like where's your favorite vacation spot? And so that begins to get them to look at how, in terms of a comic book, it's how they tell their story using that. But it also ties into all the traditional things that they may not think about. Native or non-native, they may not be thinking about like, my favorite food. Well, that's a tradition, right? Your favorite food, even if it's hot dogs, it's a tradition that's established in your family. We go out and eat hot dogs at the ball game. That's a tradition, right? So the idea of that, and as you can then, that's your jumping off point. And then you can make it more complicated. Okay, tell me more about like what's important to you about your culture. Do you participate in your dances? Do you powwow dance? Do you have this identity? And if you don't, that's okay. But what do you know about it? And so you can guide that process along and continue to make it more and more sophisticated than we have. A flip side to that, we worked with high school students in Cherokee, is to just have them have fun, just begin to have fun. If you were a superhero, what would your superpower be, right? Now draw that. Draw who you would be if you were a superhero. And draw your arch enemy.
Yes.
So how do you two tangle? What's and the origin story, right? Now, the origin story is the best. So how did you get your powers? Tainted commodity cheese. That's your origin story, the origin story. So if your power is flight, how did you get that power? And now you got them to tell a story, right? And then you say, add something cultural in that. So if you were, so you're Native, so you're Latino, so you're African American, so you're, Anglo. All right. How do you draw your family into that? Where do they come into? I mean, Peter Parker's got Aunt May. Iron Man's got his bottle.
And Pepper.
And Pepper. I'm sorry, Pepper Potts.
And Happy.
I went for the cheap one. I went for the zinger.
Yeah.
Oh.
And Happy, his security guy.
And the security guy. Yes, he's got Happy.
Very sad family group. Right?
He does. It's not cohesive, but So this idea of how we sort of looking at the world, and then obviously here's our info. You can find us on Twitter. If you need more advice, hit me up. Hit any of us up. We'll be glad to give you tips and tricks on how to work with your students. And if you got Native students in there, we'd love to see some of the work that they're doing. Tulsa, I'm sure you're going to find 1 or 2 of them in your classroom in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah, there'll be a couple of them.
And you can find some of the great work by a number of artists that we represent. This is not in any way sort of cohesive, but you can look at, you can also find us at indigenousnarrativescollective.com, which is on there as well, and that's sort of where we are. Super Indian, Native Comics. You can always find Marty on Facebook now.
Google me.
Yeah, Marty Tubles. You'll find all of his comics in that space. So, thanks for coming out. I think we're closed, right? This is it. So we'll wrap it up. 1 minute overtime. Woo!